They picked the best campsite in the canyon. That is not sarcasm, and it is the entire point of this story. Out of everywhere they could have put their tents that evening, they chose the flattest, softest, cleanest ground for a quarter-mile in either direction. Fine, level sand with no rocks in it, no brush to clear, no roots, nothing to level out. A surface so smooth it looked like somebody had raked it. Anyone who has ever set up camp in the desert would have looked at that spot and felt the same small satisfaction they felt. And every single quality that made it the best campsite in that canyon was a symptom. It was flat because something flattens it. It was clear of rocks because something carries them away. It was empty of plants because nothing that grows there is allowed to get old. The ground was not offering them comfort. It was showing them a record, in plain writing, of what happens there several times a year, and they read the record as an invitation. This is the story of the most dangerous piece of ground in the American desert, which is also the most inviting, and of a warning written in the landscape itself that almost nobody knows how to read. Welcome to Sunk Cost. The names in this story are invented, but the danger is entirely real, drawn from the way desert washes actually kill people across the Southwest every year, and from the fact that most of them were asleep when it happened. There were 5 of them, all in their 30s, out of Salt Lake City, on a 4-day trip into canyon country in late August. The one who chose the site was named Roy Tejeda, 39, and he was, by a wide margin, the most experienced desert camper in the group. That is not a detail. That is the story. Roy had been camping in that country for 15 years. He was good at it in the way that only long practice makes a person good. He knew how much water to bring and how to store it. He knew to start hiking before dawn and to be off the rock by early afternoon. He knew how to read a map, how to find shade that would still be shade in 3 hours, how to keep a group from getting strung out. His friends deferred to him about where to camp because he had earned it over and over on dozens of trips where nothing went wrong. And in 15 years of camping in the desert, he had never once seen water in a wash. Not moving water, not standing water, not a puddle. He had walked and camped in dozens of them, and every single one of them had been bone dry every single time. That is a true observation. It is also the exact shape of the thing that killed him. To understand what happened in that canyon, you have to understand 3 things. And the first one is not about weather at all. It is about how to read the ground you are standing on. A desert wash is a drainage. It is the channel that water uses when water happens. And in that country, water happens rarely and violently. And because the water is rare, people see the channel in its resting state, which is a dry, sandy corridor winding through rock, and they interpret it as a feature of the landscape rather than as a record of a repeating event. But the wash is not neutral ground. Every characteristic of it was produced by moving water, and each one is legible if you know what you are looking at. The floor is flat and smooth because periodic flows scour it and then lay down a fresh bed of sorted sand as they recede. Nature does not otherwise produce a level, rock-free surface at the bottom of a rocky canyon. Something made it that way. There is no vegetation of any size in the channel itself, and there are usually plants growing thickly a few feet up on the banks. That line, that abrupt edge where the plants start, is not an accident of soil. It is the boundary of the zone that gets swept often enough that nothing is allowed to mature. There are no large rocks or accumulated debris in the bed, even though the canyon walls above are shedding rock constantly. Something removes them. The banks in places are undercut, carved back at the base in a way that only running water does. And the one that matters most, the one that a ranger will point at and a camper will never notice, is the debris caught in the branches of the brush along the banks. Grass, sticks, bits of dried plant matter, sometimes a scrap of somebody's tarp, tangled into the vegetation at a height well above your head. That material did not blow up there. It floated up there. It marks the surface level of the last flow that came through. And it is the single most direct piece of information available in that entire canyon about what that ground does. And it is sitting at eye level or above, which is exactly where nobody looks when they are scouting a place to sleep. The second thing is why a storm 40 miles away is more dangerous than rain over your head. In late summer, that part of the country runs on monsoon patterns, intense, highly localized thunderstorms that build over high ground in the afternoon and dump enormous amounts of rain onto very small areas. It can be pouring on a plateau and completely clear, with stars out, in a canyon 30 or 40 miles downstream on the same drainage. And desert ground does not absorb that rain. This is the piece most people get wrong. Intuition says dry ground soaks up water, but sun-baked desert soil and slick rock do close to the opposite. The surface is compacted, often crusted, in places hydrophobic, and a hard rain on it does not sink in. It runs. Essentially, all of it runs. A forested watershed absorbs and delays and meters out its rainfall over hours. A desert watershed collects it and delivers it almost in full into the one channel that leads downhill. And that channel is the wash. Which means the water arriving in that canyon was never local. It was assembled across a huge area of rock and hardpan, funneled into a single narrow corridor, and sent downstream as a body of water traveling together. Not rising, traveling. The third thing is night. And night is what turns a serious hazard into a fatal one. In daylight, a flood in a wash gives a person something. You see the color of the water change. You see debris coming. You have some seconds. At night, with a storm you cannot see or hear behind a ridge, in a tent, asleep, those seconds do not exist. And a tent is a specific and terrible place to be. It is dark, it is enclosed, it is zipped. Your legs are inside a sleeping bag, and when the fabric fills with water, it stops being shelter and becomes a bag with a person in it. The sound arrives before the water, and that is the only warning the sleeping ever get. It is a low, continuous roar, and every account of it says the same thing. It sounds like wind. In a canyon at night, a person half awake hears a rushing sound and rolls over, because canyons make wind noise all night long. The ranger who tried to tell them was a BLM field officer named Vera Iyer, 31, doing an evening pass through the area. And what she did was the smartest version of this warning, because she did not lead with the forecast. She led with the ground. She asked Roy to look at what he was standing on. Flat sand, no rocks, no plants, in the bottom of a rocky canyon. Then she had him look at the brush on the bank beside his tent, and at the mat of dried grass and sticks wedged into the branches of it at above head height. And she asked him what he thought had put it there. She told him the water had been through that spot within the past year at a level higher than the top of his tent by several feet, and that when it comes as a front and can raise the level of a wash by several feet in under a minute. She told him there was a monsoon cell working over the high country to the northeast, about 40 miles up the drainage, and that the sky above them had nothing to do with it. And she told him to move up onto the bench, 10 or 15 feet higher and out of the channel, which would cost them 20 minutes of work. Roy Tejeda was polite about it. He was not a jerk. He looked at the perfectly clear sky, and he looked at the sand, and he said the sentence that this whole video exists to take apart. He said, "I've camped this desert 15 years. I've never once seen water in this wash." That sentence is true, and it is one of the most dangerous kinds of true statement a person can make. Here is the trap inside it. Flash floods in any given wash are rare events. They might come through a specific channel a few times a year, or once every couple of years, and they last minutes. So the odds that any particular person standing in any particular wash on any particular day will see one are very low. which means that a person can camp in washes for 15 years, dozens of nights, and accumulate a mountain of personal evidence that washes are dry, and every one of those dry nights will feel like confirmation. But none of those nights contained any information. Not seeing a rare event is not evidence that it does not happen. It is exactly what you would expect if it happens, on schedule, several times a year, for 3 minutes at a time. The mind does not process it that way. The mind treats a long run of non-events as proof of safety, and the longer the run, the stronger the proof feels, right up until the event arrives. This is the arithmetic of rare hazards, and it is why experienced people are so often the ones caught by them. A beginner in that canyon has no data and no confidence. Roy had 15 years of data, all of it drawn from the wrong distribution, and it made him the most confident person there. And underneath that was a second thing, which we have talked about on this channel before. Roy's 15 years had made him genuinely excellent at heat, water management, navigation, and pacing. It had given him exactly zero experience of a flood, because he had never been in one. He had earned real expertise in a set of desert skills, and then extended the feeling of that expertise across the whole desert, into a domain where he had never once been tested. There were 5 people in that group, and 4 of them set up in the wash. The 5th was a woman named Perry Halloran, 34, and she carried her tent up onto the bench above the channel and pitched it under an overhang of rock. She did that because she is not a morning person, and she hates being woken by direct sun, and the spot up there was shaded by the canyon wall until well after 8. That is the whole reason. She has said repeatedly that she gave the wash no thought at all, and that if the sun angle had been reversed, she would have slept down in the sand with everybody else. They had a good night. It was warm and windless, and the stars in that country are extraordinary. And they sat out until 11. Somebody posted a photo of the camp at sunset. 4 tents in a row on smooth, pale sand, canyon walls glowing orange, and, in the upper right of the frame, out of focus and completely unremarked, a bank of brush with a thick mat of dried grass tangled into it at above head height. They had also checked the forecast, and the forecast for their location was clear. That was accurate. It was also irrelevant, and it is worth saying plainly for anyone who camps in that country. A forecast describes the sky over a point. A wash is fed by a watershed, and the question that matters is not what is happening above you. It is what is happening anywhere upstream of you, which can be a great many miles away and in a completely different weather system. Sometime after 2 in the morning, one of them, a man named Deshaun Pike, woke up briefly and heard a low, sustained rushing sound from somewhere up canyon. He thought it was wind. He listened to it for a few seconds, and it did not change. And wind in a canyon sounds exactly like that. And he rolled over and went back to sleep. That was it. That was the entire warning, delivered correctly and on time. And it was assigned to the most ordinary explanation available. The sound got louder over the next minute or so, and with it came something that people who have survived these describe more often than the noise. A smell. Wet earth and silt and vegetation. A heavy, cold, organic smell in air that had been dry for months. In a desert canyon at night, the smell of a river arrives before the river does. And then it came. And it did not rise. That is the thing to understand about a flood in a narrow channel. It is not the bathtub filling. It is a front, a wall of moving water carrying sand and brush and whole dead trees, and behind the front, the level goes from nothing to above the knee to above the waist in a span of seconds. The tents were in a row on the flattest, softest, most inviting ground in the canyon, which is another way of saying they were in the middle of the channel at its most efficient point. We are not going to describe the next part. What has to be said is what the geometry did to their chances. Inside a zipped tent, in the dark, with wet nylon collapsing around you and a sleeping bag around your legs, there is no version of getting out fast. And even out of the tent, in that channel, there is no sideways to go. A wash is a corridor with walls, and the bench that Vera Iyer had pointed at, 10 or 15 feet up, was the only ground in that canyon that was not part of the flood. And it was 20 steps and one decision away, made at sunset by people who had felt very good about the campsite they had chosen. Perry Halloran, up on that bench under the overhang, woke to the noise and could not make sense of what she was hearing, or, in the dark, what she was seeing below her. She could not get down, and there was nothing she could have done if she had. The water was through in minutes, and the level dropped almost as fast as it had risen. By first light, the wash was damp in patches and already drying, and by mid-morning, it was dry sand again. And here is the detail that stays with everyone who works these canyons. By the time searchers arrived, that campsite looked exactly the way it had looked when the group chose it. Flat, clean, smooth. Perfectly raked pale sand, with no rocks and no brush, and no sign that 4 tents and 4 people had ever been there. The same qualities that had made it attractive at sunset had been produced, once again, overnight, by the same process that had just taken them. Roy Tejeda, Deshaun Pike, and a third member of the group did not survive. The fourth, a man named Kellen Voss, was carried well over a mile down canyon and was pulled out of the water on the outside of a bend where the flow had piled debris against an undercut bank, and he got a hold of a wedged cottonwood trunk and stayed with it. He was found the following morning with a broken pelvis, multiple fractures, severe hypothermia, and injuries from the debris in the water. He survived. His recovery has taken years and is not finished. There is nothing rare about the shape of this. Flash floods and desert washes kill people across the Southwest every year, and a strikingly large share of the victims are camped, and a strikingly large share of those are asleep. And the overwhelming majority of the ground they are camped on was chosen because it was the nicest ground available. Nobody camps in a wash out of defiance. They camp in a wash because in a rocky, brushy, uneven canyon, the wash is the only place that is comfortable. And comfort in that landscape is a signature of violence. The practical version is short. Do not camp in a wash, ever, including a wash that has been dry for a decade. Learn the signature. Flat, sorted sand. No rocks, no mature plants in the channel, with brush growing thick on the banks just above. Undercut banks and debris caught in branches over your head, which tells you the height of the last flow. Camp above the high water line by a real margin, on a bench or terrace, even when it means sleeping on lumpy ground. Understand that the forecast for your location tells you nothing about your drainage, and that the storm that matters may be tens of miles away and completely invisible to you. And if you wake at night to a sustained rushing sound or the smell of wet earth, do not lie there working out what it is. Go up. You can always be embarrassed in the morning. Perry Halloran has been very clear, every time she has spoken about it, that she does not want any credit at all. She is not a cautious person. She did not evaluate the wash, she did not notice the debris in the brush, and she did not hear a word of what the ranger said to Roy because she was setting up her tent at the time. She slept on the bench because she wanted shade at 7 in the morning. That is the entire distance between her and 4 people she had known for a decade. And she says she has never been able to make it mean anything. Vera Iyer still works that district. She still walks up to campers at sunset, and she has stopped opening with the weather entirely because she found that telling people about a storm they cannot see is the easiest thing in the world to dismiss. Now, she just asks them to look at the ground, and then she asks them to look up at the grass in the branches over their heads. When people ask her why she is so hard about a dry, sandy channel with not a drop of water in it, she gives them the line that has moved more tents than any forecast she has ever quoted. Everybody goes looking for a flat spot, she says. Out here, flat means something scraped it flat, and it was not the wind. The nicest campsite in a canyon is the one the water made.